The Indiana Fever's final 2026 roster decision has completely taken over the WNBA conversation, and if you've been following the buzz around Caitlin Clark and this franchise, you already know why fans are so fired up right now. There's a mix of excitement, confusion, and frustration building up all at once, and it all comes down to one question that keeps popping up everywhere. Did the Indiana Fever actually build a roster that can compete for a championship this season? After the preseason performances, a lot of fans feel like the answer should have been obvious. The team showed flashes of real potential, especially around their core talent like Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston, but those same games also exposed some very clear structural issues that were hard to ignore. And instead of addressing those issues directly in the final roster construction, the front office decision-making has only added more fuel to the debate. The biggest talking point is the same one that showed up repeatedly during all three preseason games: spacing. Indiana struggled badly with floor spacing from the forward positions, and that one issue ended up affecting almost everything else they tried to do offensively. When defenders don't respect your forwards as perimeter threats, they collapse into the paint, and suddenly every driving lane disappears. That's exactly what kept happening to the Fever. Instead of fixing that problem with a stretch forward who could pull defenders away from the basket, the final roster choice leaned toward adding yet another guard. That decision alone has triggered a wave of criticism from fans who believe the team is repeating a mistake that was already visible in preseason film. The frustration grew even more when conversations turned toward Justine Pat, a 6'4" forward who many analysts believed was built perfectly for this roster. She's a sharpshooting forward with real range and length, the kind of player who naturally opens up space for stars like Clark and Boston. At Vanderbilt, she shot over 40% from three on high volume, which immediately stood out as exactly the type of floor spacing Indiana was missing. But instead of securing a full roster spot, she ended up on a development-type deal, and reports around a possible injury situation only added more confusion. Fans started questioning whether the situation was fully transparent, especially after comments surfaced suggesting people shouldn't believe everything being reported. That alone has kept the conversation going non-stop across social media. Whether or not you believe the speculation, what's clear is that Indiana's roster construction now includes a heavy guard presence. With multiple ball-handling guards competing for minutes, fans are wondering how the team plans to balance possession usage, especially when Clark is on the floor. The concern isn't about talent, it's about fit. And that brings us back to what the preseason actually revealed. Across matchups against teams like the New York Liberty and Dallas Wings, opponents quickly identified a simple defensive strategy against Indiana: pack the paint, ignore the forwards on the perimeter, and force Indiana to beat them from outside with non-shooting bigs. That approach worked far too well, with players like Boston drawing immediate double teams in the post. Defenses didn't even hesitate. They knew help wasn't coming from the perimeter in a meaningful way, so they loaded up inside and dared Indiana to adjust. The result was predictable. When Clark tried to drive, she often ran straight into crowded lanes with multiple defenders waiting. When Boston received the ball inside, she was immediately met with double teams before she could even turn. Everything became harder than it needed to be because the spacing simply wasn't there to punish defensive decisions. One of the clearest examples came against Dallas, where rebounding became a major issue. The Wings controlled the glass by a wide margin, and Indiana struggled to secure defensive rebounds because so many players were packed into the same areas around the basket. That kind of congestion doesn't just hurt rebounding, it breaks offensive rhythm entirely. After that game, head coach Stephanie White didn't sugarcoat the performance, pointing to toughness and urgency as key differences. But fans watching the tape felt the issues went deeper than effort. Turnovers, poor spacing, and possession breakdowns led to easy scoring opportunities for Dallas, and Indiana found themselves constantly reacting instead of controlling the game. Still, there were moments where Indiana showed what the system could look like if spacing improved even slightly. In a matchup involving the Nigerian national team, forward Darius Dantas hit multiple three-pointers, and suddenly the entire floor opened up in a way it hadn't in the previous games. That one change alone altered how defenses had to play Indiana. And that's the core of the entire debate right now. One shooter at the forward position can completely shift defensive geometry. When defenders are forced to step out of the paint, everything changes. Driving lanes open, post entries become cleaner, and offensive flow becomes far more natural. The problem is that Indiana currently doesn't have that consistent stretch presence locked into their guaranteed rotation. That leaves the system vulnerable, no matter how creative the play design might be. And that's another key point fans are arguing about. No matter how good a system is on paper, it still depends on personnel executing it. Some fans argue this is a roster construction issue more than anything else. Others believe it's a coaching philosophy issue. Stephanie White has reportedly explored different ways to use Caitlin Clark, including off-ball movement and even occasional forward-like positioning in certain lineups. The idea is to get Clark into second or third actions instead of having her initiate every possession. But that concept has created its own debate. Clark's game thrives in transition. Her ability to push the pace before defenses are set is one of her biggest strengths, and many believe slowing her down or shifting her away from primary ball handling reduces her impact instead of enhancing it. Clark herself has made it clear where she feels most comfortable. She has emphasized her confidence in transition play, especially off rebounds or quick outlets where she can immediately attack before defenses organize. At the same time, she has acknowledged the value of movement-based systems similar to what teams like the Golden State Warriors use with off-ball motion, where constant movement creates defensive chaos. But even that comparison highlights the issue. Those systems work because every player on the floor is a shooting threat. Without that spacing, off-ball movement loses effectiveness because defenders can simply ignore weak shooters and collapse into help positions. That's where Indiana's current structure becomes complicated. With multiple guards sharing the floor and limited shooting from the forward spots, the spacing never fully opens. That creates overlap in roles, stagnant possessions, and crowded driving lanes that slow down the entire offense. Fans have pointed out that this isn't just a tactical issue, but a structural one. It's about how the roster was built. And the most controversial part of the conversation is that the final roster decision appeared to favor guard depth over addressing the forward shooting gap. That decision has led to intense online debate. Some fans believe Indiana missed an opportunity by not fully committing to a stretch forward profile that could have solved multiple issues at once. Others argue the team is still evaluating long-term fit and development. Meanwhile, attention has also turned back to Justine Pat and whether she could still become a factor later in the season. If her shooting ability translates at the professional level, she could theoretically become exactly the kind of piece Indiana is missing. But for now, her role and status remain part of the larger uncertainty surrounding the roster. What makes this situation even more interesting is that Indiana has shown flashes of high-level potential despite all these issues. When turnovers are forced and transition opportunities appear, the team can score quickly and efficiently. Players like Kelsey Mitchell and others have shown they can produce in bursts, and the team's guard depth is clearly not the issue in terms of talent. The real concern is how all those pieces fit together when the game slows down. In half-court situations, spacing dictates everything. And right now, Indiana's spacing forces players into crowded areas that limit creativity and efficiency. That's why so much of the discussion keeps coming back to one concept. One stretch forward could change everything. Not in theory, but in actual execution. A forward who can consistently hit from deep forces defenders to step out, which opens the paint for Boston and creates driving lanes for Clark. It's a domino effect that impacts every possession. As the 2026 WNBA season approaches, expectations around the Indiana Fever remain high because of their star power and potential. But preseason film doesn't lie, and fans are watching closely to see whether the roster construction decisions will hold up under real pressure. Right now, the debate isn't fading. If anything, it's intensifying. And as opening night approaches, all eyes will be on how Indiana responds to the issues that were already exposed before the season even began.